You're listening to a story that has been used to scare children into behaving for hundreds of years. A young prince, caught between two colossal empires, raised on iron and fire, who then turned fear itself into a weapon. Some call him the hero who guarded the gates of Europe. Others swear he was a walking nightmare. But the most interesting truth lies here. Both are correct, and neither is sufficient. Hold on tight to your headphones, because the further we go, the more this story escalates, and at the climax, in the dark of night in 1462, a dagger nearly pierced a sultan's heart. But nearly, and that single word, nearly, changed the fate of the entire Danube. Vlad III was not born to be gentle. He entered the world in late 1431, as the Balkans simmered like a pressure cooker. To the south, the Ottoman Empire swelled with every campaign. To the northwest, Hungary snarled. And in the middle was Wallachia, a buffer zone as thin as a knife's edge. His father, Vlad II, had just joined the Order of the Dragon, a chivalric order sworn to protect Christendom from Ottoman pressure. The title Dracula Dragon, which also became synonymous with devil in later Romanian, suddenly cast a giant shadow over the entire family. His son, therefore, bore the name Dracula, meaning son of Dracula. The name sounded like an oath. Live by honor, die by honor. Vlad's childhood was forged by books and the rod. He studied mathematics, geography, Latin, German, and Church Slavonic. He rode like the wind and wielded a sword like rain. But just as his studies were progressing, politics knocked on the door. His father was overthrown, only to return by striking a deal with the Ottomans, the throne in exchange for tribute and 2 sons as honored guests. That's right, honored guest in 15th century diplomatic language meant hostage. Radu, Vlad's younger brother, adapted quickly, learning Turkish and living within the court's protocols. Vlad was different, stubborn, glaring at everything. Yet it was in Edirne that he learned a lesson Europe would later memorize. Fear is not just an emotion, it is a technology of power. The Ottomans used it to open city gates long before the battering rams arrived. Bad news arrived faster than a post horse. In 1447, a Hungarian storm brewed, and his father and older brother, Mircea II, were captured and killed. The Wallachian throne was suddenly empty. At this moment, the Turks, despite knowing Vlad's fiery personality, still chose to place a bet. They supported the 6-year-old in reclaiming the throne. Vlad ascended quickly, and fell just as fast when Hungary counterattacked. He fled to Moldavia, then Transylvania, falling into the orbit of the Hunyadi family, the most formidable military clan in the region. John Hunyadi initially supported Vlad's rival, Vladislav II, but the game changed when Vladislav appeased the Ottomans too much and dared to burn Transylvanian villages. The deck was reshuffled. In 1456, Vlad led his forces back to the Danube, striking down Vladislav II in single combat. The Wallachian throne returned to its rightful owner. Hearing this, what do you guess happens next? Correct. Blood will be spilled, and not just on the battlefield. Vlad looked at his throne like a fortress riddled with holes. The nobles' boyars changed sides faster than one could flip a hand. The borders were in tatters, and corruption ran deep like rotten roots. He chose the fastest method of system correction available at the time: terror. German, Russian, and Balkan pamphlets recount a series of hair-raising punishments. But we must keep a cool head. Many of these stories were black propaganda and cannot be treated as legal records. However, one thing is certain. Vlad used public, intentional violence to rebuild order. He invited boyars suspected of conspiracy to an Easter feast, then had them arrested on the spot. Most were severely punished, others were exiled to hard labor building fortifications. The immediate result, surface-level order returned. Everyone knew the law was, draw a knife, lose your head. The long-term consequence, he stripped away his own, already thin, political support. With internal affairs temporarily settled, Vlad turned his face south. In 1453, Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, had fallen to Mehmed II, a talented and ambitious sultan. From this point, the Danube became the world's dividing line. Vlad understood that if Wallachia merely bowed its head and paid tribute, its doom was just a matter of time. By 1461, he decided to break the peace with his own mouth. Letters sent to King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, John Hunyadi's son, boasted of daring raids across Ottoman-controlled Bulgaria. The number 23,884 enemies eliminated appeared in that letter, remember? This was a figure he recorded himself to intimidate and request aid. Don't treat it like satellite statistics, but the psychological effect was undeniable. The Ottoman borderlands panicked, refugees fled back to Anatolia, and the title Sepesh, the Impaler, spread across Europe. This wasn't without reason. During his campaigns along the Danube, Vlad continuously erected forests of stakes at the gates of captured towns, both to prevent counterattacks and as giant billboards inscribed with the words, "Don't try." It was also during this time that the anecdote of the Turkish envoys having their turbans nailed to their heads for refusing to remove them in his presence emerged. While the authenticity is debatable, it shows how he defined the sanctity of power, either bow or become a warning sign. Are you feeling a shiver down your spine listening to this? Good. Because just a few months later, that very fear would turn back to find him. Mehmed II was no mediocrity. He sent a general with 1,000 cavalry to capture Vlad. The plan was exposed, and the Ottoman force fell into an ambush. This battle is often mentioned as one of the region's earliest uses of firearms. Fire arrows, handguns, light cannons, and though the scale was modest, it was enough to turn the Turks' escape route into a corridor of panic. Unwilling to wait, Vlad pushed his troops across the Danube, striking a chain of targets from Obluchica to Rahova. His blitzkrieg stunned the Ottomans. And then, the famous letter exaggerating his military achievements was sent to Corvinus. "I have killed 23,884 people. The peace has been broken by me." Mehmed II decided to abandon his Greek campaign and bring the war to the Danube. According to many sources, he brought an enormous force, traditionally exaggerated as 150,000, though the real number was likely lower, it still far surpassed anything Vlad had. With spears, swords, a few field cannons, and light cavalry, Wallachia could not fight the successive waves of the Ottoman regular army. Vlad chose the tactic with which Eastern European history was all too familiar: scorched earth, burning food, evacuating the populace, poisoning wells. The front line became a silent land, leaving only smoke and the smell of ash. As Mehmed approached Targovishte, Vlad employed shadow warfare, small raiding parties that bit and tore at the enemy lines, culminating in the single most famous night of his entire life. The peak was the night of the 17th of June 1462, a night we must replay in slow motion. Vlad disguised himself, scouted the enemy camp, and located the Sultan's tent. Then, as night fell, the Wallachian forces struck from two directions, piercing straight into the center like a spearhead of wind. Chaos erupted, banners tangled, orders overlapped. Vlad charged toward the tent and stabbed into the wrong one. In that instant, history veered onto Branch B. If the dagger had found Mehmed's heart, the map of the Balkans would be different. But it didn't happen. At dawn, Vlad withdrew his forces to the mountains. Mehmed, stunned, looked at the smoldering fires and scattered corpses and still advanced into Targovishte. Instead of a resounding victory, he found an empty city and, according to many reports, a gray forest of the impaled. It is said the Sultan sighed. "A man who can do this is no ordinary man." After the compliment, he installed Radu, Vlad's brother, who had become loyal to the Ottoman court, as the new puppet ruler of Wallachia. Vlad had won the battle psychologically, but lost the campaign strategically, forcing him to flee to his supposed allies. The game began to reek of treachery. Vlad retreated to the mountains. His wife, according to local legend, chose death rather than fall into enemy hands. He sought out the only ally left capable of turning the tide, Matthias Corvinus. On the surface, the Hungarian king nodded. Inside, he made a cold calculation. He wanted the throne of the Holy Roman Emperor, which meant he needed to reduce trouble with the Ottomans. And so, the sharp swerve occurred. Instead of reinforcements, Corvinus arrested Vlad and imprisoned him for years. If you're angry right now, hold on to that fire for a moment. Because the paradox is this, that Hungarian prison gave Vlad something the battlefield never could, a political metamorphosis. During his confinement, attitudes toward Vlad gradually softened. He married Ilona Zalagi, a relative of the king, improving his status at the Hungarian court, converted to Roman Catholicism, and crucially learned how to truly negotiate. When the times changed, he was released, but his return to power was anything but triumphant. After his release, Vlad gathered a patchwork coalition of Hungarian, Transylvanian, Moldavian, Wallachian forces and followed the Danube back home. In 1476, his rival Radu was dead, and the successor Basarab the Elder fled before engaging in battle. Vlad returned to the throne, but it was a throne without legs. He had only about 4,000 troops left, and a country that was bleeding out. The Ottomans returned in the blink of an eye. In a chaotic battle at the end of the year, Vlad was killed. Most Turkish sources claim he was beheaded, his head sent to Constantinople in a jar of honey as a final message. The location of his grave remains a mystery to this day, yet another wisp of smoke curling around the name Dracula. At this point, we must pause to separate the gold from the silt. First, don't be led astray by the 15th century German pamphlets. Their job was to convince Europe that Vlad was a monster, thereby justifying alliances against him. Therefore, stories like burning a poorhouse full of people or forcing criminals to eat body parts should be labeled low reliability, used to illustrate psychological warfare, not as forensic reports. Second, the massive casualty numbers should be properly sourced. Vlad's letter to Corvinus, Ottoman chronicles, Russian manuscripts. Citing the source maintains historical integrity and adds depth to the story. Third, correct the terminology. Constantinople belonged to the Byzantine Empire, not the Holy Roman Empire. The Sultan of the era was Mehmed II, not Mehmed III. And key dates, like Hunyadi's campaign, were in 1448, not 1548. Just a few accurate details are enough to elevate the story from sensational to credible, but even with the propaganda removed, the man underneath was still terrifying. But to be fair, even if we discard all the black propaganda, Vlad remains a master of the science of fear. He understood a cold principle. On the border between life and death, that laws are only as effective as the public's belief that punishment will be immediate and certain. He staged performances of justice to turn rumors into a behavior control system. This is why merchant caravans recorded that Wallachhia's roads were strangely safe during his reign. It was said a golden cup left by a public well remained untouched for weeks. Of course, this kind of safety came at a price, and that price was political. When the fires of foreign invasion flared, he lacked the allies willing to die with him. Place Vlad next to his contemporaries like Skanderbeg in Albania or Stephen the Great in Moldavia, and you see the full picture. All had to confront the Ottomans. All used violence, but the way they unified their home fronts differed. Skanderbeg built a legend of the impregnable mountain fortress, striking and retreating, relying heavily on holy alliances from Italy. Stephen was a deft diplomat, switching sides at the right time, keeping Moldavia from shattering. Vlad, however, was a shooting star, burning brightly but lacking the political atmosphere to sustain himself. So, what about Bram Stoker's Dracula? The direct connection is non-existent. The Irish author merely borrowed the name and a little Eastern European flavor when writing his 1897 novel. He did not copy Vlad's life onto the page. But the name's gravitational pull was so strong that it swallowed the real man into its shadow. The interesting thing is that Romanians today still revere Vlad Țepeș as a symbol of anti-invasion, a military helmet placed on the head of Stoker's literary vampire, creating two parallel Vlads, one in the historical record, one in the popular imagination. This very confusion is fertile ground for storytelling. We get both magic and mud. If this story were adapted for the screen, let the narrative rhythm guide the viewer through three clear emotional layers: astonishment at the audacity, the night attack, the Danube ambush, haunting by the technology of fear, the forest of stakes as political advertising, and bitterness at the Allies' betrayal, Matthias Corvinus locking the door at the negotiating table. In each segment, always plant a small hook. What if that had been the Sultan's real tent? If Vlad had been less brutal with the boyars, would he have had more allies when he needed them? If Corvinus had chosen a unified crusade, what would the map of Central Europe look like? In conclusion, Vlad Dracula is an expensive lesson in borderland power. He demonstrated how a ruler can turn honor into a steel frame, fear into a fortress wall, and one night in the wrong tent into destiny. Hero or demon? No answer is big enough unless it includes another word: dangerous. Because any technology of fear, once it operates too well, will eventually turn its blade back on its wielder. Do you want us to continue digging into the night attack of 1462 with an animated map, simulating the troop movements and analyzing the success proximity index? Or would you prefer a separate episode comparing Vlad, Skanderbeg, and Steven to see who used fear most effectively with the least self-destruction? Hit subscribe, leave a comment on which angle you want to see first, and ring the bell, because on the border between myth and history, every click you make is a charm against the darkness.